Thank you very much for Mayor John Taylor of the wonderful town of Newmarket to come on to the 905 for his second guest appearance, so to speak, to talk about what, because an interesting fact about the housing crisis that we're in is that Newmarket decided not to sign on to the province's housing target numbers. And we wanted to invite you on just to kind of explain your rationale, your thought process on that, Mayor Taylor.
Yeah, no, happy to. Yeah, certainly when that first announcement was made, I think it was the first 28 or 29 municipalities that were provided housing targets, and Newmarket was amongst those. I was already well aware of the challenges we had here in this area in Newmarket, also Aurora and East Gwillimbury, with sewage allocation. So just for the people listening in, not that you should, but you can, in theory, build housing without the necessary infrastructure in any category, i.e. transit, road network, without having that built in advance. The exception, and the only exception, is sewage capacity. You cannot move forward without sewage capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew instantly when I saw the number of 12,000 units that was not even remotely possible. And I had a number of people say, "Oh, frankly, people within the province even and provincial members and other mayors, oh, it's just a target, John. Why are you being difficult?" And I said, well, first of all, it's also sending a signal to the community or communities that we're going to do something or achieve something that's unachievable, and in a very public forum. But also, as we all know now, the provincial government has directly tied funding to these targets, as they said they would at the start. And so there's also that issue of, are you signing up for the impossible? And in our case, it is. And if you want, I can explain quickly the math and the science on that impossibility.
Well, I mean, I that's coming out of an article that we read in the Toronto Star where you were featured in, and I thought just that the fact of the conversation nationally is all about we need to build housing, we need to build housing, and nobody disputes that. But I thought your rationale for not signing on was a very logical one, in that, and it's kind of like the if you will, the unsexy part of housing development. It's like, well, we're when you flush the toilet, where does it go? And that you're taking this into account is that that's part of the purpose of a municipality is to make sure that the pipes flow where they're supposed to flow.
Right.
And so, can you just give us a bit of insight into this problem that you've seen coming for a long time, and you're trying to do the responsible thing of making sure that that's taken care of, and just kind of the roadblocks and the barriers that you're now facing in taking care of this, essentially what I would argue is the purpose of a municipality in Ontario.
Yeah. So I would start by saying quickly that I also see the need for more housing and support it, and I've been moving in that direction for some time. I'm on the Housing Affordability Task Force in New York Region. I'm on the Housing and Homelessness Task Force for the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. I'm the chair of Housing York, our subsidized housing provider, and Newmarket. And here's a little interesting note for people: if people think we're being a laggard or not pulling our weight, Newmarket's the fourth most densely populated municipality in Ontario. Toronto, Mississauga, Brampton, Newmarket. We have many cranes in the air right now, and I am happy to embrace housing, especially more affordable types of housing, or et cetera, and rental housing in particular. And I started a campaign called Make Rental Happen some time ago that saw the first 15-story rental tower in York Region built in 30 years. So that's just my caveat, that this is not, everybody likes to paint us as NIMBYs. Oh, you're not signing on because you're afraid of NIMBYs, or you don't want to build housing. It couldn't be more untrue. So in our case, what we've been dealing with, and this is the great irony, which I told directly to the premier, is that, and the minister, is that, the reason we can't sign the pledge is because in 2014, we submitted an EA, an environmental assessment. That's the full proper way of processing. It took us 2 years to do the EA, $20 million. We purchased the land to build the sewage treatment plant, and 2 governments and 7 ministers did not sign the bottom of the page saying, you can now proceed with the project. So when you talk about removing red tape at the municipal level to build more housing, how about a signature that could have had by now a plant built that would have brought online something like 70,000 new homes over 20, 25 years? That was never signed. It still isn't signed. We're told just recently, you're to go south now. hook into the Southeast Collector or down to Duffin Creek on Lake Ontario and not go north and build your own plant. So now we're back to the drawing board. Well, the whole time this is occurring, the clock is ticking and we're running out of sewage capacity. We're now down to, and by any standard in the GTA or anywhere, this is close to zero. We now have 2,600 units worth of capacity left. The province's target for us is, and I'll find the number, but the province's target for Newmarket is roughly 1,500 units a year. So if we were to achieve their target, we'd be out of allocation in the first 2 years of an 8-year target. So the number they want us to build, the 12,000, we have 2,600 units, and then the pipes are full, and we cannot move forward. And it's not a question of, oh, maybe you could go. It's you just can't do it. It's science and it's math.
So, I mean, if Premier waved his magic wand and tomorrow you had a new sewage plant, would that be, then you would sign up? You would say, yep, now we can move forward. Is it that single thing that's really the barrier here?
Yeah, well, the answer to that is yes and no. So the first part of it is, and I know you know this, but nobody can wave a magic wand to build, a billion, and it's over $1 billion piece of infrastructure, right? Or at least the first phase is 550 million. So we know that. But if we could, let's take that. Let's take those, because it's a great question. What I would do, would I sign on now? Probably, at least to the 6,400 we've proposed as a compromise, which, by the way, is still an immense stretch goal for a community whose 10-year historic average is 350 units a year. But the market is turned down, interest rates are up, no one's building, and frankly, even by the province's own online spreadsheet, there's only less than 25% of communities that are even tracking on to meet their targets. So you've got that barrier, number one, which is the marketplace. But the bigger question here is infrastructure beyond water, wastewater. Water, wastewater is the one you can't do, but it doesn't mean you should build unbridled and endlessly without all the other forms of infrastructure. And so when you've got a provincial government, and frankly, let's take the federal government. Federal government's saying 500,000 new Canadians a year. Provincial government's saying 1.5 million houses. Both I agree to in principle. But where is the bold, ambitious, hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure plan fully funded to support that multi-generational stretch goal? It doesn't exist. And so what I would say is, and I'll stop here so you can jump in, but what I would say is I would really think that from minute one, with Bill 23 reducing our revenue dramatically, the mayors, probably we should have all collectively said, we're prepared to sign on when you show us the funding plan to build the infrastructure, to build the transit, the water, wastewater, et cetera.
That's the kind of, quite literally, maybe the $1 million or the $1 billion question, isn't it? The traditional relationship between the province and the municipalities, I feel, has always been kind of a divide and rule situation, that the mayors, through no fault of their own, this isn't a criticism, this is just the way things work, tend to negotiate separately with the province and say, we want this, and to an extent, the whole MZO situation is a kind of that in miniature, that the city goes along and says, we want this MZO, and the province either gives it or doesn't. Where what's really needed is that kind of collective bargaining almost between the municipalities and the province that doesn't exist. And this is a classic case of that, because I mean, the thing that I'd really sort of put a question into that very long point. The point I always come back to is that municipalities don't build. They're not, municipalities are not the people that build. To give a municipality a target to build something when the people that build are developers is crazy, because there are so many steps between the saying we'd like to have houses and houses actually arriving. Is that not, beyond the infrastructure bit and the funding gap and all those things, which are all very important points, isn't that at the root of it all the kind of craziness of the situation, that it's basically saying you cities need to go and build stuff that you have no power to actually build?
Yeah, there's a few points there, and first of all, that's a key one. And there's a new big city mayors caucus, the small urban mayors caucus that I sit on have all started calling it for now and saying, look, you can't tie our funding to pulling building permits because we don't pull them. We can issue them, and if you're asked for a building permit, you get one. But what we control are planning approvals, and if you really need to tie us to some metric, tie it to one we control. Or have some control over it. I mean, we don't even have total control over building or planning approvals, because if you don't apply for a planning approval, we don't have it. But that's in general, yes. But to go back to where you started, mayors are being put in an untenable position, and that untenable position is this: that is that either sign on or sign up for things that you don't believe are realistic, or you don't believe are properly funded, or that you believe your municipality's long-term funding sustainability is being jeopardized over and over. Stand up and speak out to that and challenge that issue that we have, which frankly is the biggest issue that's not being talked about, is the long-term financial sustainability of municipalities and their ability to deliver critical infrastructure to support housing growth. But the problem is, what many are thinking, and I'm speaking maybe for some that don't want me speaking for them, but what many are thinking, or do you do that, or do you just behave the best you can and hope to get $5 or $10 million? And $5 or $10 million over the next 10 years, delivering critical infrastructure is nothing. And so I believe that we have to speak to the critical financial picture we're facing here with Bill 23 and other things. And look, the province will do things and say, but no, we're helping. Look what we're doing. We just announced $200 million for water wastewater. That's $200 million across Ontario. Newmarket, East Gwillimbury, and Aurora's project through the region is $1.4 billion. Like that wouldn't even be enough funding to move our project forward. And that's for the whole province. So there needs to be everybody needs to sit down together. I genuinely want to work with the province. We need to sit down together, go over the numbers, and understand what it's going to really truly cost to put the infrastructure in place to support 1.5 million new homes over 8 years.
On that note, the last time we had you on was to talk about Bill 23 and how you thought the concerns you had at that time concerning your relationship between Newmarket and the province. And it kind of seems that you're a bit prophetic on that and the difficulties that have come forward. As a mayor who wants to get housing done, but is also looking to be responsible to your constituents and the community of Newmarket, do you think that there is a housing plan, that there is a plan that we're all moving forward on in this province to hit the targets that we need to hit for the housing to come?
No, not really. And there certainly is not a plan. I mean, we know well, it's not a plan, it's a target of 1.5 million homes, and then the targets by each municipality. And everybody knows, every developer knows we're not going to get close to that. And then one of the problems is we're having conversations at the region about the infrastructure we need to put in place to build 1.5 million homes, or our share of that. And if we put in the infrastructure and the housing doesn't come and the DCs don't come, our debt levels just grow and grow and grow. And so you do want to have infrastructure in advance of growth, but not dramatically in advance or more than you need. So it's a very fine line. And I would argue that there is not a plan to put in the critical infrastructure, or even a plan on how to incentivize that growth. And I've got to finish with this point, because it's the one I'm most passionate about, which is that everybody is talking about supply. Everybody who understands this issue, and I recently heard a housing professor speak to this at a conference, and it was he simply said, look, there's a housing supply and a housing affordability challenge or issue in our province, but the response is not the same. It requires two different responses for housing supply and housing affordability. And right now, we're all going down one path of supply. And we're going to end up with a bunch of $1 million condos and houses and townhomes, or $2 million. And housing affordability, and certainly deep affordability, will have not been addressed at all.
That's certainly that's a theme that we've come back to again and again and again on this podcast over the last 3 years. The developers want to build one type of housing. It's not necessarily the housing that we actually need, but why would you build? I mean, I know there's been recent changes in the law federally with the tax being removed from rental accommodation builds, but yeah, I mean, really, there's been no affordable housing built in this province in terms of like rental accommodation for 30 years. Why? It's the question that everybody should be asking first, rather than continuing to go down the road that we've been going down. Tied to your turning down of sort of signing up to that target, there's also the strong mayor powers issue, which is a big deal, and the vast majority of municipalities have signed up basically because here's a check, here's also strong mayor powers. The temptation must have been very strong, because not only have you, in a way, you've made your own situation worse, because not only did you turn down new powers that might have made your job considerably easier as mayor, but you also turned down money that you undoubtedly need. How big of a deal is that? I mean, would you have wanted those strong mayor powers if you'd been able to get them without signing on the dotted line?
Yeah, I think you might be surprised by my answer. Absolutely not. I do not think they would make my job easier. I actually think strong mayor powers will make your job more difficult. It might make it easier at one moment, but I truly believe that strong mayor powers, and I'm using a provocative phrase and maybe unwisely, but is in my opinion a virus being injected into democracy. And I think we're going to look back on this 5 years from now and realize that it's really broken down the democratic process that exists between mayors, councils, and the community. And when communities see decisions being made that do not represent a majority of the people they elected, and when councils see mayors not respecting their voice, it's going to create a lot of disharmony, and it's going to make the job harder and harder and harder. So I fundamentally reject strong mayor powers conceptually and in reality, and I think many people, and to be fair, many of my colleagues, if you watch, are talking about it very cautiously, because I think they see the potential pitfalls and dangers of strong mayor powers. Some are embracing it, but many that embrace it are in difficult. They have their difficulty within the council working relationship. I think it's something that is just should be, in my opinion, rejected outright.
I kind of have felt for a while that there was an argument for strong council powers, and by that I mean that there's been a traditional complaint, usually by elected members, by elected councillors and mayors, that staff had too much power to control the agenda, and that the weakness of mayors and councils meant that you get elected with a platform, which is really we should, I ran for council, and the part of me is like, well, I can't make any promises here. I can't promise a thing. I have no power to deliver anything other than by hopefully cooperating with staff. So I felt there was an argument for that you're the guys who get elected, you have the mandate, you should be able to set an agenda. But that the strong mayor powers are even weaker council powers, if you like. I just wondered if you just sort of want to comment on that. I mean, do you think there should be stronger powers coming from the kind of elected side of the equation in municipalities?
In general, no, and I'll provide one caveat at the end, and it's probably very applicable to what your area of concern is my guess. But generally speaking, no. I think that I jokingly once said, but I mean it. I didn't want or need strong mayor powers, because I think a strong mayor is a mayor who can work with their council, reach consensus, and move together on a decision. I don't see it dissimilarly with staff. In fact, I think the council and the mayor have the power. They have to understand how to apply that power and apply it respectfully as well. But in a perfect world, you build a relationship with your staff where they are working with you, where you listen to them and hear their concerns and they hear yours. and then you move forward together. And I think that's very achievable. I think sometimes you've got councils or mayors who are new to a corporate setting and don't understand perhaps, or I don't want to be demeaning, but to navigate that space of consensus building like people do in their workplaces all the time, and bring it forward. So the one caveat I would say to that is that we have a bit of a problem where it involves the OLT, formerly OMB, which is that when it comes to planning staff have an obligation to provide their professional opinion, but by the de facto, by the role of the OLT, really are holding the ultimate decision-making power in planning over council often, because once they issue the decision, anybody in the development industry knows enough to know if they've got a professional staff opinion that says they can do what they want to do and they take it to the OLT, they will be victorious. So when council says, hang on, no, that's not right for a community, we think we should do this instead. That balance, I'm not positive what the fix is. I have some ideas, but that part perhaps, and I don't think it's the intention of staff to have the power over council all the time, but it's a de facto power because of the presence of the OLT and the weight of a staff opinion at the OLT.
We're coming up on our time, and I do want to get your response to something that I read in that Toronto Star article, and that was the fact that Premier Doug Ford was quoted saying, in regards to your refusal to sign on to the pledge, that he was going to, quote, "I'm going to call him out, the mayor of Newmarket, Mayor Taylor. It's called Team Ontario, team effort. We need to build homes. We need to build them quick." And I want to get your response to the idea that you're not on Team Ontario and that you're not you're not on board with their agenda.
Well, I would argue that that the Premier or the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the current government would have a hard time finding an example of a municipality that is more on board. We are aggressively moving forward with every type of housing option there is. I can point to many municipalities around the GTA, which I won't, that have less tolerance for height and density than we do. We have, we pre-zone lands in our urban centers around major transit station areas that accommodate 16,000 units pre-zoned. Just away you go. We had as of right basement apartments 30 years ago. So I can't imagine being more on board for this mission than we are, of building more houses and building more affordable houses and more types of housing. And what I would say to the Premier is, and this is all I want to end maybe where I've started in other articles, which is, this is not political, and I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to be logical, principled, and work towards effective policy to solve the problem we're all trying to solve. And I will work with anybody, any government, and the Premier and the new municipal the affairs and housing minister. And I've sat down with them both one-on-one more than once, and I provide my input. And I think it sometimes makes a little difference, but certainly there's room for us to work together as a Team Ontario. But Team Ontario will function best as a group of municipalities that aren't just buying into a program, but are being heard, and that program reflects their input.
Do you think, we've heard this from other experts on the podcast that have come on, and as the person kind of on the ground, trying to get shovels in the ground, do you think what's needed is just kind of like a national strategy get together, other mayors, not just in Ontario, but across the country, getting together with provincial counterparts and the federal government, and get an actual plan together so that all three levels of government in this country are on the same page? You know exactly what your targets are going to be. You know how to access the funds and the means to do it. You can know where the barriers are that you can take your powers to do, and you know that you'll have the support of the province and the federal government to do what you need to get done. Because do you think that do we just need to get that done?
Yeah, I never have a short answer, and I apologize for that. But I would say, first of all, I think that the landscape's a little bit too different from province to province. So I think the idea of having all three at the table, but I don't think it could be a national conversation. And I think, as you know, it's hard enough to get consensus in Ontario. I don't want to, but the principle of having what we don't need. So in some ways, the opposite of what you're saying. the province is now weighing in and saying, if you do this, this, and this, we'll give you some funding. Otherwise, you get none. Frankly, now the federal government's playing this with the Housing Accelerator Fund. If you do this, this, and this, you may get some Housing Accelerator money, and it doesn't even have to go to housing, by the way. And what's the federal government doing and the provincial government doing in micromanaging cities and municipalities? We know what we're doing. What we need to do is sit down and agree together on a responsible and sustainable funding formula to dramatically accelerate infrastructure, and then agree to some general targets that we agree to, that we are going to aspire to for housing in different areas based upon different realities, like your infrastructure or the fact that you just got a subway or whatever, and then give us the funding and get out of our way and let us do it. We're, contrary to this sort of growing narrative that cities are in the way of growth and towns are in the way of growth, and it's full of NIMBY responsive elected officials. I'm sorry, I reject that. Is it true in some cases? Yeah. Is there some of that goes on? Yes. Is that the problem with housing supply and affordability in the province of Ontario across the country? No. The problem is that we need to significantly inject funding into a structured infrastructure plan related particularly to water, wastewater, and transit. And then after that, frankly, green space, recreation, et cetera, to support these kinds of numbers of people in housing. And then let's get going with it. But we know how to do it. We can approve everything. We'll continue to approve everything. We meet with developers constantly, sit down and say, are you ready to redevelop your site? What is your timeline? What can we do to be of assistance? We're not doing the opposite. We're not trying to stop things from happening. But this micromanaging by the province and the federal governments about how you should do it, that's slowing us down.
I mean, ultimately, cities cannot. Developers have the right to develop as of right on the land that is zoned. If a developer comes to you and wants to build, a building will happen. No municipality can stop that. This whole argument is upside down. Like you say, it's disappointing. My feeling was exactly the same. It's disappointing to see the federal government kind of buying into this argument that if we hold out a big enough carrot, or the alternative seems to be coming from the opposition federally, that if we hit the municipalities with a big enough stick, the building will happen. It's like, these aren't the guys who have the power to actually build. It all comes back to the developers, and you mentioned the NIMBYs, and certainly that there is often opposition to particular buildings, particular developments. But I have yet to, and I have asked multiple times in this podcast for someone to give me the example of where NIMBYs have stopped a development happening. They may have delayed it a little bit, but generally that delay will have been nothing compared with the delay that will happen if it's appealed to LPAT, whatever the LPAT's called again, which I still can't remember after 2 years. It's so wrong, and it's such a destructive view of municipalities and the role that they should be playing, and the idea of local democracy, which is actually decisions are made best closest to the people, closest to where we live when possible. Some decisions have to be made federally, some have to be provincial, but if you can make them locally, because that's when you'll make the best decision. It's so frustrating and so upsetting. That was just my little rant there.
Yeah, and I quickly add one sentence on that, which is I can't try. It's hard for me to explain the level of distraction provincially and now somewhat federally through all of these interventions and requirements and hurdles and prove you're doing this and prove you're doing that, and you may get funding. Now you're being audited. We need this, and it is taking my focus away from trying to advance housing. It is not supporting my focus.
Do you see a path forward to get housing built in Newmarket in the current landscape?
Yeah, I do actually. I think we've got to be the one area, so we've got to pay attention to the market, right? I make a point of speaking with developers all the time. Some people see them as an enemy. I see them as a key player in the production of housing. And for sure, right now, rental is more likely to advance than condo for a chain, at least outside of downtown Toronto, where we are. And so there's some opportunities there. And when people are coming, I've had 2 developers come to me and say, I'm thinking about changing over to rental. I'm like, bring it on. Let's go. Come sit down. Let's talk. What else can we do? And I think the other part is there are some new incentives around through Bill 23 around, and that we had already ourselves around subsidized or not-for-profit housing, rental housing, and then really unique infill projects, ones where you can do, transit-oriented development more, which reduces the cost somewhat, around parking, et cetera. So I do think you've got to pivot and focus on where the opportunity is. But I'm convinced we'll continue to see there's going to be a dip. There's, at least for a year to 2 years, there's going to be a bit of a dip because of, interest rates, construction costs, et cetera. And some will sit on the sideline and see. And if they come to the realization this is new normal, they'll go back to building again. So a bit of a dip, but overall, no, I'm not terribly concerned. Of course, we're not going to hit the numbers anywhere near those, in neither will the surrounding area that are the targets are. But I think we can keep building housing. I think the real challenge is to get creative about how to build and have the proper funding partnership at the other two levels to build, for the full spectrum of need. So, missing middle, rental, affordable rental, supportive, subsidized housing, et cetera, co-op housing, all of it. We need to, that part's a bit trickier, and that's where some more innovation is required.
Well, I see we're coming up on our times, and I don't want to keep you any further away from your busy day. So thank you very much, Mayor John Taylor of Newmarket, for coming on to talk about this and giving us the perspective from on the ground in the housing crisis. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.